I never meant to fall in love with him. Not the way it happened, quietly, unexpectedly, like sunlight slipping through a half-closed window and landing exactly where your heart hides. My name is Alina, and this is the story of the letter I never sent. The one that taught me what love really sounds like when it has no words. It began on a rainy afternoon in a small, forgotten library tucked between a bakery and an old flower shop. The place smelled of paper, dust, and something sweet, like pages that had soaked up 1,000 memories. I went there to escape the noise inside my head, to disappear into books that belonged to other lives. But that day, someone else was already there. He sat by the corner window, headphones on, a cup of cold coffee beside him, completely lost in a book that looked older than either of us. The light from the window touched his face just enough for me to notice how peaceful he looked, like he'd made friends with silence itself. At first, I pretended not to see him. I opened a random book, turned pages I didn't read, and told myself I didn't care. That curiosity is a quiet thief. It steals your attention before you realize it. Day after day, I found myself returning to that same library, to that same corner. Sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't. But whenever he was, the air felt different, calmer, like the world had paused for just a second to let two strangers exist in the same breath. We never spoke, not even once. But there were moments when our eyes met over the tops of bookshelves. And in that tiny glance, entire conversations seemed to happen, conversations about dreams, about loneliness, about everything we couldn't say out loud. It was strange and beautiful at the same time, to feel so much and yet say nothing. I didn't know his name, his story, or even what music played in his ears. But I knew how it felt to sit across from him and feel safe in the silence. Maybe that's where love begins, not with words, not with promises, but in those quiet places where hearts learn to listen before they speak. Then one day, the library felt different. The rain was louder, impatient, and the air carried a strange emptiness. I walked in expecting the comfort of routine, the soft rustle of pages, the hum of quiet life, but his chair by the window was empty. His coffee cup wasn't there. The old book was gone. And for a moment, it felt like someone had turned off a light I didn't know I'd been standing under. Sat down anyway, telling myself he was just late. But the hours stretched thin and heavy, like waiting for a melody that would never play again. The next afternoon, I went back. His chair was still empty, but something caught my eye. Tucked inside the shelf where he always sat was a small piece of folded paper. My heart started racing before I even touched it. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but the handwriting, I knew it. Messy, slanted, like it had been written in a hurry, like the writer was afraid the words might disappear if he didn't let them out fast enough. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The note said, "Sometimes you meet someone who feels like home, but you're too afraid to knock." I stared at the words until they blurred into tears. I didn't need his name anymore. I knew exactly who it was from. In that single sentence, he had said everything I'd been too scared to feel. My chest ached not from sadness, but from the weight of realization. We had both been standing on opposite sides of the same door, waiting for the other to open it. That night, I went home and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I started to write. I told him how his quietness had been my peace, how his presence had made the world softer. I confessed that I had waited for words I didn't even know I wanted to hear. I wrote about fear, about how we both wore it like armor, pretending not to care while our hearts whispered the truth. And when I was done, I folded that letter neatly and placed it in an envelope. But I didn't write his name on it. I just stared at it for a long time, knowing I'd never send it, yet somehow feeling lighter than I had in weeks. I never sent that letter. I kept it inside my favorite book, between 2 pages that spoke about courage. For weeks, I would open it, read the first line, and close it again. It wasn't because I was afraid anymore. It was because I finally understood something some stories aren't meant to be finished. Some are meant to be felt, remembered, and carried quietly in the corners of our hearts. Life went on. The rain stopped visiting the library so often. The sunlight started spilling through the windows again, and new faces filled the empty seats. But every time I walked past that corner, I still felt the ghost of his presence, a faint warmth, like an echo that refused to fade. I no longer looked for him, though. I looked for what he had given me instead. The courage to feel deeply, even when I had no promise that anyone would feel the same. Months later, I found that same old book on the shelf again, the one he used to read. Inside it, someone had scribbled another note, different handwriting this time, but the same heartbeat behind it. It said, "Maybe home isn't a person. Maybe it's the feeling of being understood, even if it's only for a moment." I smiled when I read it, because that's what he had been to me, a moment of understanding so brief, yet so infinite. I never met him again, but I don't think I needed to. What mattered wasn't whether he came back. What mattered was what he left behind, a quiet kind of love that asked for nothing, that gave without needing to own. Sometimes, the most beautiful connections are the ones that never turn into stories. They stay as feelings, unfinished, untitled, but unforgettable. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you've had a moment like that to a person. A look, a silence that changed something inside you. And if you have, hold it gently. Don't rush to define it or explain it. Just let it live in you. Because love doesn't always ask to be understood. Sometimes it just wants to be remembered. And if this story touched something in you, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Subscribe for more stories that remind your heart what it means to feel truly, deeply, and beautifully.